Alright, before we go into the clouds, let's quickly go through my portfolio. 350k here in Robinhood, but I don't have any clouds here. I have 160k in Google, 15k in Microsoft. I don't own any Amazon, but I do want to buy it at some point of time. Now, much like yourself, I don't have any respect for IBM, but I think they describe this really well here. Cloud computing is on-demand access to computing resources. And compute will always be necessary, at least as far as my eye can see, just like how electricity will always be necessary. Let me show you this video by Alibaba co-founder where he described this really well.
So for the cloud computing, it's not that fit in that sense. That's one thing. The second is, cloud computing is very different in terms of business. I always say to my colleagues, I'm very lucky to working on it. The first is a technology. Not like any other business, they start with the business, and technology just help the business, okay. But the cloud computing, not that case. So you have to have the technology first. That's the key. So it's a technology. The second, not every technology could become the business, okay. That's why I always say only 1% technology could be a business. So actually 90% technology, just technology, okay. So we're very lucky, okay, it's a business. And more important, it's a lasting business. So thinking about a lot of business, have this life cycle, every 10 years, you have to thinking about another opportunity, okay. But cloud computing is a very good business. It could last for another 50 or 100 years, okay, because the computing is so fundamental. So when we use an analogy about between the electricity and the computing, it means a lot of things, okay. So electricity is a lasting business. It will be there for another 100 years, okay.
And on top of selling compute, what's happening right now is they are trying to sell intelligence. And here's where first advantage for Google comes in. They have their own intelligence with Gemini, unlike AWS and Azure, where they depend on OpenAI and Anthropic for most of the intelligence. I was trying to find good sources to talk about this, but I couldn't find anything, so I just Googled it for you. You can read this if you want. And now let's go into Google strategy. And Google focusing on AI for cloud and its rest of the business is not new. It has been doing this forever. And you can see Sundar says here, 90% of GenAI unicorns and 60% of funded GenAI startups use Google Cloud. And it's not just Google Cloud, they even like Google Workspace. None of the startups like using Office 365. They all use Google Workspace. Even OpenAI uses Google Workspace. And on that, I remember a funny tweet. Let me try and find it. Sam joined a Google Meet. Ilya sent a Google Meet link. Some funny tweets here. All about Google Meet, basically. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is startups just like Google Workspace. And they love Google Cloud, especially AI startups. I can show you more evidence. For example, if you go to Wayback Machine in Jan 2024, long way after ChatGPT revolution started, Google says AI, 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 AI everywhere. And let's see what AWS and Azure were doing. Azure, there is no mention of the AI here. I think there's probably some AI here. And AWS is no AI again. Okay, AI is here, but not in the main page. And let's see what's happening now. Google is the same. AI, 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 AI everywhere. And then, Azure says AI, 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 AI everywhere. And let's look at AWS. Agentic AI, AI, AI everywhere. The point I'm trying to make here is Google's bread and butter is AI. And they also really seem to like cloud. You can see the headcount in 2022. I couldn't find anything in 2025, but you see cloud has a headcount over 50,000. Even the search is 10,000. It just shows how much Sundar really wants cloud to be successful. And the reason I think they didn't grow as fast as AWS or Azure is because Gemini wasn't just as good as OpenAI or Anthropic. But all that has changed with Gemini 2.5 Pro. And we can see some recent survey. Google has jumped from 38% to 68%. And you can see Amazon and Azure dropped from providing first-party frontier model APIs. And they dropped because people are going directly to OpenAI or Anthropic to get the APIs. And obviously, OpenAI uses Microsoft and Anthropic mostly uses AWS, but it's just not same as owning the model. And on top of the owning the model, Google even owns the TPUs, which are actually doing pretty well sitting next to NVIDIA and training. Which gets to the point where I keep saying Google is extremely vertically integrated. If you compare Google, AWS, and Microsoft, Google is the only one which has the top tier model. On cloud, for sure, AWS and Azure are leading. I gave a star for them here. But at the same time, they're far bigger as well. And Google, despite being smaller, has a vertical integration which will give us very strong tailwind for it. And we come to Silicon where they have fucking TPUs, which they planned years and years before. And the reason Microsoft even invested in OpenAI is because they were shitting the pants about Google. Let me show you this article. Microsoft OpenAI investment was triggered by Google fears, email reveals. There's this guy called Kevin Scott, he's Microsoft CTO. He's the one who seemed to have pushed for this deal of investing in OpenAI. We are multiple years behind the competition in terms of machine learning scale, and competition here is basically Google. He details how it took 6 months for Microsoft engineers to replicate Google's BERT language model because our infrastructure wasn't up to the task. Scott says he was initially dismissive of AI efforts at OpenAI and Google DeepMind when the companies were competing to see who could achieve the most impressive game-playing stunt. As I dug in to understand where all these capability gaps were between Google and us for model training, I got very, very worried. Google was getting scary good. You can say this was in 2019, but Google didn't let their foot off the gas pedal. Their infrastructure is still top tier and no company even comes close to them. Let me show you a video. This is a very good infrastructure guy. He knows a lot about infra and the compute builds by big companies. Let's see him talking about Google's TPUs.
So this is like, so this is an image of like what a standard Google data center looks like. By the way, their data centers look very different than anyone else's data centers.
What are we looking at here?
So these are, so if you see this image, right, in the center, there are these big rectangular boxes, right? Those are where the actual chips are kept. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, you can see there's like these water pipes, there's these chiller cooling towers in the top, and a bunch of like diesel generators. The diesel generators are backup power. The data center itself is look physically smaller than the water chillers, right? So the chips are actually easier to like keep together, but then like cooling all the water for the water cooling is very difficult, right? So Google has like a very advanced infrastructure that no one else has for the TPU. And what they do is they've like stamped a bunch of these data centers out in a few regions, right? So if you go a little bit further down, this is a Microsoft. This is in Arizona. This is where GPT-5 quote unquote will be trained.
If it doesn't exist already.
Yeah, if it doesn't exist already. But each of these data centers, right? I've shown a couple images of them. They're like really closely co-located in the same region, right? Nebraska, Iowa, and then they also have a similar one in Ohio complex, right? And so these data centers are really close to each other. And what they've done is they've connected them super high bandwidth with fiber. And so these are just a bunch of data centers. And the point here is that Google has a very advanced infrastructure, very tightly connected in a small region. So Elon will always have the biggest cluster fully connected, right? Because it's all in one building, right? And he's completely right on that, right? Google has the biggest cluster, but you have to spread over 3 sites, and by a significant margin, but you have to go across multiple sites.
It's not just this. You can also see how Google was the first cloud company to go fully in on liquid cooling, which is the reason why I actually invested in SMCI, 22,000, and actually I have more, another 24,000, and I have some options in SMCI as well. But anyway, let's go back. Google is king of infrastructure, and infrastructure is the basis of selling compute. And if you ask if Google is the king of infrastructure, why aren't the king of compute? Google was mainly focused on their own needs, which is Google Search and YouTube. And Google Cloud is relatively new compared to Azure and AWS. So in essence, top tier model, very good cloud, with crazy infrastructure adding TPUs. I think they're gonna do really, really well going forward. I've shown you this before, how Google jumped And I think Google will go to number one at some point, maybe within a year or two. And we have more metrics. OpenRouter is mainly a developer focused website, so there won't be any big enterprises which go through here. And the OpenAI number doesn't actually represent the real metric because apparently OpenAI has some quirks and people don't prefer to use it through OpenRouter. But here I'm trying to show you how Google changed. It's the top at 28% right now, but you can see in July 2024, it was shed. You can see our light green and how it was. There's 7 companies ahead of Google at this time. Even fucking Microsoft models were better. And that's not the case anymore. Google 2.5 Pro changed the game for them, and I can see them doing only better and better. And given all this vertical integration, I think they're gonna do amazing. And to be fair, let's go here. It's not like Azure and Amazon are losing market share in total API usage. It's just that they're not vertically integrated. So I don't expect them to grow at the same rate Google is gonna grow. I do expect them to grow, but at least right now I have no interest in owning them. I want to own Amazon mainly because of robotics, but Microsoft even less so. One reason I can see is XAI has their API hosted on Microsoft. That's a good sign. You can see from Musk's tweets that he thinks Google is the biggest threat and biggest AI company, and I wouldn't expect him to host their API on GCP, but this is good for Azure. Which takes us to which stocks are good to own. You all know how Google is priced. Obviously, this is mainly because of the search business apparently dying, according to many people. I think they'll do good in search, but that's not the focus of our topic here. Given how good they're in cloud and the expectation being so low for them, which we can see in ETFs like the Bush funds, which is led by that pink jacket guy. I think his name is Dan Ives. He put Nvidia first, which is fair. If you compare it to the electricity era, it's like selling cables. Obviously, cables need to be set up before electricity can be used at scale. And then it has a bunch of other stuff, and you can see how low Alphabet is. And he actually is a little bit bullish on Google compared to most other analysts. If you ask me, looking at the long term, I would put Google at number 1, and I would even leave second and third place empty. And then it's probably Microsoft, Amazon, OpenAI. But I'm trying to tell here, I think Google is an extremely undervalued company, and that's why I'm on 160,000. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next one.